Welcome to How to Quote Your Work. I'm Dante St James. We're literally going to look at how to create quotes, what you need to include in them, and we're going to look at a few systems that make the whole quoting process a lot easier for you. Let's get underway with how to quote your work. First of all, I'll just share my screen so you can follow along and see all the different slides I've got on there. It's not going to be death by PowerPoint. We're quite literally going to be just looking through, I guess, the introduction to quoting first, and then we'll move on to the actual systems. And I'll go into those systems live to show you what the quoting process looks like in there. So as we get underway, a bit of a quote here from Catherine Delahaye Payne, who's she's got an author, she's a publishing house, she's been part of a consultancy agency in America, quite the dynamic woman. The moment you make a mistake in pricing, you're eating into your reputation or you're eating into your profits. Please take that forward into this whole thing, because that is a very important point that tells us just how important pricing is. And we will cover the pricing process as part of this very shortly. What we will cover overall, though, is why we quote, what needs to go in a quote, how to price your quote, how quoting works in different systems like ServiceMate. We'll look at that one, as well as Quotient, which is one of my favorites, Xero, which is probably something a lot of you are using right now, and quoting in quoters.io. If you're watching this on Zoom right now, you'll be noticing that you can access the chat and the Q&A. This will be recorded and going to the Business Station YouTube channel, as well as my own one under Dante St James, my name. You'll be able to watch that. If you are watching on YouTube, though, please comment below if you've got anything, and please do subscribe too. Smash that subscribe button, because you can get lots and lots of different content from myself and from Business Station for the next several months. This is brought to you by Business Station and the Australian Small Business Advisory Services Digital Solutions Program, in conjunction with Regional Development Australia Brisbane for the whole Queensland state, and Treaty Business Consulting, helping you out in the Northern Territory. Bit of background about me. I'm educated at the University of Western Sydney, University of New South Wales, the Chartered Institute of Marketing, and I've got about 4 or 5, looking at the wall now, 5 different pieces of paper from TAFE New South Wales. I'm a bit of an addict when it comes to learning and development. I work closely with Facebook Australia through their Boost with Facebook Australia program and Google's Digital Springboard program, as well as 3 government programs, the Australian Small Business Digital, the ASBAS Digital Solutions, which is what you're accessing this through now, the NICE program, which is helping connect those who are starting businesses with mentorship, and with the Be Connected program, which is all about accessing the online world for older Australians. So what is a quote? A quote, basically, it's very, very, very like ground down to the absolute elements, is about your terms of service, how you are going to do what you're going to do, and what the cost of that is going to be. But it also is a legally binding contract once the customer accepts the quote. So that's important to know, that this is not a legally binding contract just because you give someone a quote. It's only a binding contract when they accept the quote. So they accept it in writing, they accept it in a way that can be proven, or they accept it through, for instance, these quoting systems I'll show you soon, how they can press accept button on there, and that sends a message back to say that is accepted. Also, a lot of older contracts and quotes may work on the idea that you'll have something of a signing of a literal hard piece of paper. If you don't have that, digital signing or DocuSign is another process that goes through that. Now, the opportunity in every quote that you do have, and there are many opportunities, because quoting is at the core of a good, solid sales and cash flow process for your business, is that it needs to be competitive. It needs to show your business and yourself by default in a professional way. It helps you to aim for better profitability, and I'll show you how in a sec. Also offer what you do at the right price, not just at any old price. And a quote actually helps you to lower your legal risk when it comes to consumer problems down the track. Now, if we explore the idea of being competitive, we look at the wins and the losses in the market will tell you what a customer is willing to pay. So often it's said that, that the price you should charge is the price that the customer is willing to pay. In a lot of times, that's beyond just, just simply saying, yeah, the customer's willing to pay this, so therefore I better say it, or better charge this amount. Sometimes it's just simply about the fact that if you're winning every quote, you're probably charging too little and you're quoting far too cheap, Or if you're losing every quote, you may be a little bit too expensive. You might be above the market rate. The market doesn't determine the rate that you charge at, but it does influence it. So bear that in mind, that while you have an idea in mind of what you would like to charge, the market may have other ideas. Whether you charge higher or lower will become a game of trial and error, depending upon the competitiveness of your quotes according to others. Now, there's lots of ways for you to get that a bit more competitive. Basically, you can ask around and see what other people have been quoting. You can actually reach out to your competitors and pretend to be someone else and get a quote, I guess, for what you're doing, depending on whether it needs a measurement or someone to come see you or talk to you. That could be a bit weird. But the idea is that the market does have some kind of idea on the pricing for your quote. Having a professional image, well, a good looking quote is a good looking business. It's one of the first impressions I have with partner from that initial reach out. If they don't know who you are, if they've never met you, if they don't know what you sound like, they haven't seen you, heard you, been in the same room as you, the quote is often one of the first things that's going to come up and say, this is the thing that's going to be what is going to drive someone's impression of your business. If you're producing a quote which is rather a little bit loose and a little bit messy, or scribbled down on a piece of paper, or worse, handwritten on a piece of paper, you're not looking professional. You're not looking on top of it. It's not presenting your business in its best light. But it does also need to be easy to read. Handwriting kind of eliminates that. It needs to be easy to print. It needs to be easy to accept. Different people with different businesses have different processes for their accountants. Some accountants they work with want pieces of paper to reconcile things against. Others want a nice, easy process to go, this goes into one system, and then it is carried through a process to the end where finally there's something which can be charged out, paid out, remittance advices can be used, anything like that. Digital quotes will allow you to do a whole lot more than just simply produce a nice looking quote. In one of the cases we're going to look at soon, they'll even produce what is essentially a website that the customer can click on and interact with to see what they're doing, and also allow you to have lots of different additions. So, you can have a base level product and then be able to add more modules at step by step if you wish to do that. Kind of like you do when you're booking a Jetstar flight. You start off with a basic fare and you go, oh, I need a bit of extra leg room, wouldn't mind a bite to eat, and I want to be able to board before everyone else. Better profitability talks about quotes that keep you accountable to how healthy your business is going to be. So it allows you to track whether you're actually doing the right thing by your business when you're setting a price for something. If you're setting a price for something that is way too low for what you should be charging, then you're not being accountable to the health of your business. But if you look at everything, you monitor what's going on, you see the effect of the discounting you may have to offer. This is a lesson that most of us go way too hard on, and it takes a really, really nasty incident where someone is just going to use and abuse you at a lower rate for you to understand that, yep, at some point you need to up your rates, or at least start out at the right level of rates before going and charging really ridiculously low rates. It also helps you to track your margin and your profitability, and a bit more about that soon, which gives you an idea of how to work with things like margins and profitability as well. Then it also lets you know whether the price is right. Consistent pricing means less mistakes, and a lot of these allow you to have templates within them. So all 4 systems have a template that they work with that allows you to have preset amounts that you simply put in. You either use a code or you just start typing in and it shows you what that particular item may be. It's where your pricing is already set for each individual item. Now, you may have variations on that. You can override it at times too if you need to discount, or in some cases where you need to charge something higher because there's some kind of service surcharge, or there's some kind of reason you need to charge a little higher for this particular one, given that maybe the service level is on a weekend or a public holiday, or there might be a raise in the amount of the cost of product, or the cost of materials that has to go into that quote. Calculations in these systems also tend to be automated, so there's far less chance of you making a mistake. If you're trying to do it on a calculator and you tap the wrong key, you're going to get numbers all over the place. Or if you're using even an Excel spreadsheet, if you haven't set that thing up right and you're not checking your work, it's just as inaccurate as trying to do long division as a 5-year-old. It's just not going to work out well for you. And naturally, you want to lower your legal risk. When it's all on paper, It's all out there in the open, and there's nothing that can be brought up against you, except for I've seen legal shows, and I've seen what they drag rabbits out of hats and all sorts of things in those. Basically, the client accepts your terms as quoted, and therefore you deliver that. So that's their protection. You're delivering what you quoted, and they are paying what they agreed to pay upon your quote. There's no gray areas there. Everyone understands what their part to play is of it. The consumer knows that they've got to pay that bill. You know you've got to deliver that service at that price. That said, there are some ways around all this for at least the business side for it, where if you have to charge more for it, there is an allowance for that, but you will have to communicate with that customer. And you can hold back services if they refuse to pay more because they said you quoted this much, particularly in cases where they may have changed the scope of what the project is going to deliver, if that's what you're doing, or change the scope or the number of systems or the number of products or add-ons or modules they've added into with what you are going to provide them with. So that's all easy. We know what a quote is. So what actually goes into a quote? If you've never really done one before, this is actually a really good question. My first quote, I had no idea. I had to look at what quotes I got previously from other people and then just work off those. And it turns out I actually got a little bit wrong because the quotes that I was copying weren't particularly complete. So if we look at what goes into a quote, what actually has to go both for your business, for legal compliance, and also for the sake of being customer friendly, you've got to add some business details in there. So it'll be your name, your business name. A registered business address is very helpful as well for consumer follow-ups. So if there needs to be any sort of cross-referencing of your particular business, that is very helpful. Now, the registered business address is not necessarily having to go into every quote. A lot of us work from home. We don't want people knocking on our door or rattling our gate and causing the dogs to bark just because they want to question something that's on the quote. So the registered business address, that's something you might be able to knock off. But a contact phone number is pretty good, solid practice, or at the very least, a contact email address that people can get through. So the must-haves are your name, your business name, either a phone or email or both. And I'd say the must-have that has to be in there to show that you're a legitimate Australian business is your ABN, your Australian business number. That shows that you are either entitled to charge GST if you're a GST registered business by now, or if you're not a GST registered business, then you're able to at least work within the confines of Australian consumer law, and you are a legitimately registered Australian business, not just somebody doing work in their backyard and taking cash payments. For the GST component of it, when you put in the GST pricing, and we'll come to that in a second, that also is something which allows them to go, well, they can claim that GST, and then if they're using your service or your product to then on sell, they pay your GST, and then their clients will pay their GST as well. So it becomes this chain of GST upon GST upon GST, or as my father likes to call it, a tax upon a tax upon a tax upon a tax. Total cost and breakdown needs to be in there, not just the total cost saying this is what it's going to be delivered for. It is very helpful when you start breaking down those costs. Let's say, for instance, that you are producing a copywriting. You're doing some copywriting for someone who is writing the material on their website. So the first item could be the cost of research for that copywriting. That could be priced as a certain price. Then the next cost will be the actual building of the copywriting to be written before it's published. Yes, that will be done. And there's a price for going through an approval process. There's a line for that. And another line item could be the publishing of your copywriting on your website as another line item. The more you break things down, the more that clients can see the total of what you're going to be doing. Now, you may have produced a proposal that more adequately explains all that, but in your quote where you're saying, this is what I'm going to do it for, and this is a price, breaking it down allows you to much more easily integrate with a lot of downstream systems. So if you're using a quoting system, you might be hooked into then something like MyOb, or Reckon, or Xero, or QuickBooks. a lot of these systems will take in what you have from quoting systems and bring those line items across to the invoice so that each of those can be broken down as well. This is particularly important when you're in a business where there's different levels of GST or no GST at all applicable to particular line items. Say, for instance, if you're going to say, I will sell you this fresh fruit, that is not attracting GST. But at the minute that I do a service on top of it, that part of it attracts GST. It's why sometimes you get some receipts from places and it doesn't always add up to 10% of the total cost being the GST, because some things are GST oriented and some things are GST exempt. So having that breakdown helps you to do that, especially when you get to the world of goods and services tax. So just list each job and each product and each service. The alternative to that is if you're providing a bundled all-in-one service that you don't want to break down because you don't actually want to see the client coming back to you and trying to talk you out of, oh, can we just not do that bit and that bit and that bit and do just these two here because they want to bring the cost down. If that's what you're trying to do, it'll be a very good idea for you to not list things quite as big. So just list things in bigger categories rather than everything being in like little micro categories of each particular product and whatnot. Then you're going to have your variations and your revisions. So if you're actually causing if someone says to you, for instance, can you update the quote to include X? You should probably show the revision that was made to the original. So you have the original line item in there and then show that it's different. So for instance, it might be the original line item said it was $100. It's now going to cost $120. So you have the $100 and you cancel that out and have the new one, just to show that there has been a revision, there has been a conversation, and it also lets the customer know that you are listening to what they said and now you've done exactly what they've asked you to do by updating that quote in the way they've asked. It also shows where there's variable costs that you can show the cost for each variable. Say, for instance, you are selling apparel. If you're selling clothing, you will then show that this is the cost of the t-shirt as a basic cost, but you wanted to get the extra piping around the edges, well, that's an extra $5. If you wanted to get a variation of, say, a different color, that's an extra $5 as well. So the base cost of $20 is now $30. And then you might say, well, actually, it costs me more in fabric to make an extra large, as opposed to making a small. So you'll add a surcharge on top, maybe an extra $5, $10 for the extra fabric and work that goes into making the bigger size. Showing these variable costs shows the consumer at the other end, your client or your customer, what you've actually priced and why it's priced, rather than simply going, if they're buying a small and they're buying an extra large and you're going, small is $5 and extra large is $15, and they're going, oh, you're discriminating against the bigger. If you break it down a bit, then it answers those questions rather than causing big fuss along the way. It also can be for something like if you're a tradie, you're doing tiling, for instance. One particular tile may cost, $78 a square meter. This other one might cost $256 per square meter. Showing that variation and that variable costing in your quote is going to make a massive difference to the understanding at the other end. So people will understand that they're getting either good quality for money, or they'll look at it and go, nah, you're too expensive, see you later. Either way, you want to make it easy for them to do either coming to you or not coming to you. Then you also need your payment terms and conditions, such as how is this particular quote going to be paid for? Are they going to be invoiced? Do they have to pay for it in a shop? Do they have to send a check? How is that going to work? Is there going to be some kind of payment agreement? Now, your quote, you might think this is something that happens in the invoice. It can happen as early as the quoting process, remembering a lot of these quoting systems will plug into your invoicing systems. And in some cases, the quoting systems are also invoicing systems. So is there a payment agreement that you can enter into? Say, for instance, if it's $1,000 for your particular service, will you accept them paying off at $250 a week for 4 weeks, or $250 a month for 4 months? Or is there a balloon payment at the end for something which is a subscription cost, something like that? Also lets you put in are there discounts for early payouts? So for instance, if someone pays out their $1,000 by month 2, that you give them some kind of incentive to do that. So that might be that, if you pay it all up front, you get a 20% discount. But if you pay it over 4 months, because of the extra administration involved and the risk that you're taking that they may not pay, then you will charge the full rate for them. And are there penalties for things like missed payments? This is where you need to outline all of this in your quote, that if they're going to miss those monthly payments, then there's going to be a $15 surcharge for having to chase those payments. So knowing that these things are all in there to what someone can sign off on means that you're covered for all the different things you want to cover for. Now, you may be sitting there going, I'm a tiny little micro business and this doesn't mean a lot to me. It actually feels really weird. And why would I want to drive my clients into feeling so legalistic about everything they're dealing with me? Because clients are horrible sometimes. That's what it comes down to. Sometimes they are just horrible. Now, business owners can be horrible too. I'm saying that we are a special breed. I'm just saying that customers and clients can be awful. They will sometimes be that person who will pick at every opportunity they can to ensure they do not pay what they said they were going to pay, even if they signed off on it. They'll find loopholes and ways around it because they've just got the time to do it, or because they're just that way inclined. Not every client is going to be like it. In fact, in my case, it's probably around about 5%. So 5 out of every 100 people I deal with are the ones that are really difficult, and they'll call you on every little spelling error and basically saying your quote is, you have to give me that in a quote, and you have to give me a discount because you spelled that wrong. All that sort of stuff, they will try it. Trust me, they will try it. Having everything correct, having everything laid out and all your terms and your payment preferences laid out will make you a big, it'll just save so much trouble in the end. Another one which is good is a preferred payment method. So to let people know that you have a preferred way you wish to be paid. That could be that they have to go into the bank and put it into a bank account, or do it through electronic funds transfer. That may be that they just prefer to do everything on a credit card because it's so much easier. Or they say, send me an invoice and then I'll have the financial people pay it for you. That will depend very much upon the kind of setup you want to have. So if you want to allow people to pay very easily straight into a credit card, which goes straight to your account, or by electronic funds transfer, given that these days the OSCO payments and what they call Pay ID allows you to make instant transfers between one bank and another in Australia, where the banks are participating with that, that could be a very good option for you. Or you may just go, we take cash only for whatever reason, as long as it's all tracked down there of what your preferred payment method is. But just recognize too that it's not really reasonable for you to demand one single kind of payment. Just because you want to avoid paying 1.95% on PayPal or 2.5%, whatever it's gone up to recently, doesn't mean you don't offer that option as well. You can always put in an extra surcharge for any of those costs that are going to be incurred through payments processing and PayPal and credit card processing fees and all that. You can cover these things, just price it in. Make sure that there's a price that makes an allowance for those kind of fees, whether they choose them or not. This is where the margin comes in, making sure you got enough margin on top of what your actual costs are to ensure that all these little things are covered, as well as paying yourself, which is pretty bloody important. You also have a schedule of work in your quote, and that schedule of work, if it's a project, explains when the work is going to start, or what the milestones are along the way. What is stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, what they can expect to have done and when. Now, if you're producing just a single product, that may not be appropriate for you, but telling people in there a schedule of delivery, perhaps that you can expect delivery within 5 business days, or it may take up to 6 weeks because of delays due to COVID, all those kind of things. Or even just going, okay, I'm building a website for you. It's going to start on February 1 and finish by February 28, allows people to understand that there is a schedule in place that you're committing to go for. People feel good when they know what's going to be done and when. Just like putting a pool in your house. It feels great when you know what the schedule is, because you know when you're going to be swimming in that pool or not swimming in that pool. Or in the case of, if you're in the northern half of Australia right now, you're just constantly swimming in floodwaters. We seem to have a lot of rain right now. Expiry acceptance is important too, because it's telling them when your quote is valid until. So this allows you to cover the fact that prices of your materials change, prices of your services change. You can say that this quote is only valid for 30 days. You have to accept it within 30 days. Otherwise, the price could change. Now, the price could go down, it could go up. It's just basically a way of, number one, ensuring that you are covering yourself to any further price rises that could happen down the track. If you have an open-ended, non-expiring quote, and then someone comes back to you in 3 years' time and wishes to accept that quote at the 3 years ago rate, you could have a problem with the fact that labor costs more, the parts cost more, the materials cost more, you cost more. A whole business model has changed. Yes, you can actually reject that. So once they've signed it, it's a legal requirement of them, but you can kind of wheeze your way out of it, I guess, by saying simply that, oh, this really wasn't meant to expire then. But if you put the expiry date on it and a nice quick expiry, even 30 days might feel like it's quite rushed in some cases. But remember, it's only 30 days for them to accept it, not 30 days to have the job finished by. So having an expiry date will allow you to say, well, I'm going to say that I'm going to only allow you a certain amount of time to accept this within. So it gives them almost a sense of urgency. They will know that they have to respond to this in a certain time in order to get that particular rate and that job and lock it in, which also helps you to schedule in your work or to schedule in your workers or to work with contractors, knowing that you need to secure them at certain times. If you go too far out down the track, you're not too sure that when you're able to get other projects in, if something else drops in, you want to take that may affect the timing with which you can deliver this other quote. So make sure you do everything within the schema of your whole business to ensure that you're able to deliver all the things you say you're going to do in a timely manner and within the time you actually said you deliver it in. This is still a challenge that I have to this very day of making sure I get to everything, because I like to say yes to almost everything. I'm sure there's more than one person in this chat today who would feel like they're in that same position. So the legal status of a quote is that an estimate is not a quote. So if you want to provide something which does not lock you in and someone doesn't have to agree to, you're going to have, and this is particularly notable when you've got longer projects that are more complex, that an estimate is your way of saying, look, it's possibly going to cost this much, but I'm not going to tie myself down to it. Don't quote me. It may cost $22,000, but it may cost more. This is like for someone to get sort of that ballpark figure. Say, well, it's a really educated guess of how much it's going to cost, but it could cost more or it could cost less depending on various different things happening. Like rain, for instance, may slow a project down, which puts the cost of the project up. An estimate is not a legally binding document, but an accepted quote is. So if you're a bit shy about going straight into quote land, make sure you do an estimate first, but at some point you will have to do a quote because that's what someone agrees to. No one agrees to an estimate. They just go, okay, that gives me a good idea of what I might be looking for in price. But a quote is definitely what they're expecting to pay and what they're agreeing to pay. Now, a quote, as we said before, is binding once it's accepted by the client or the customer. And if you're not sure what to charge, again, I would say offer an estimate first, because sometimes it may involve some testing, it might need measurements. And this is the other thing too that people don't realize is that quotes can take a long time to build. It can take me half an hour to an hour to build a quote for something that's quite customized. It might even take longer if I need to research it. So it's not out of the realms of normality to charge for a quote. And it may seem like, oh, that's a bit weird, you're charging a person for a quote. But if you're spending 2, 3, 4, 10 hours building what you need to for a quote, you need to be paid for that. So you're well within your rights to say, yes, I'm happy to provide a quote, but it will cost you $120 to have that quote because of the time it takes to repair it. That may stop people from shopping around so much. If you're charging for quotes and others aren't, well, it might get a bit of a weird sort of situation where you're losing jobs to people who do give free quotes. But ultimately, it's up to you and the kind of thing you do. If you're doing something which the quoting process doesn't actually take you away from your desk, then a free quote seems to be quite reasonable. But if your quoting process takes you not just away from your desk, but takes you to have to go to a conference to go and get the information you need, and then you have to go and visit the client in another state to be able to properly quote it, then you're going to charge for that, because that's just it's just not fair for you to have to absorb all that time and cost in order to provide an accurate quote. And you do want an accurate quote because remember, they're going to hold you to this. So how do you price your quote? Here's a bit of a basic guide on how to do it the right way. And it will vary a little bit from business to business, but the principles remain the same. Your pricing should be profitable because you are not a charity. Well, you might be a charity, but you're still going to make money to pay your bills, right? So you are in business to make money. So you need to make sure there's profit in your pricing. It needs to be realistic. As we said before, the market, although it won't set your rate, it may impact it. If you've got 20 different people in your, I'll cover this a bit more actually, because there's a bit more to it. Honesty is very important because ripping people off is going to send you down to down the gurgler land. So when you look at profitability, we're looking at covering your costs, first of all. So making sure every cost, all the labor, all the parts, all the materials, all the time is covered. Then you cover your time. So if you're getting your stuff outsourced to someone else, you're paying for their time. Then you need to charge also for your time, the admin, the charging, the putting together, the quoting, the customer contact. Your time has to be paid for. That's what we basically do in jobs and in business. We sell our time for money. And then your margin is what's on top of it, which is either your cream. It's what leads you to your profitability and covers any kind of contingencies such as price rises, changes in circumstances, changes to your costs that have happened since the quote was put together. You want that margin in there to make sure that you are making money and it's a profitable business, right? So margins will vary depending upon what the industry is you're in. So if you're in food and beverage, that may run at about 30%. And the accountant will always come back to you and say, mate, you're at 28%. You need to get it back up to 30. Come on, price rise time. And this is why we've always got price rises going on in retail and hospitality, and everything seems to go up a little bit every year, is because we always need to bear in mind that our costs of power go up, our costs of materials go up, costs of labor goes up because we're giving people pay rises every year. The cost of rent will often go up from year to year as well. So you're in a situation where your costs could be going up significantly between last year and this year, meaning that your margin is going to get smaller unless you also put up your prices to match that cost increase. It seems like it's basic business 101, but you'll be surprised how many businesses, particularly small and micro businesses, will not budge on their pricing, even though their costs are going through the roof every year. That little bit higher, a little bit higher, a little bit higher every year. But then, oh no, I want to keep it at this price because my customers, they're very, very loyal to me. I'll tell you now, they're probably loyal to you because you're still charging well below the rest of the market. They're not loyal because of you, they're loyal because of your price. The minute you hike that price up, they go shopping around again. Whilst that may be a really bad thing to begin with, the people who are costing you money are not helping your business. They're actually dragging your business down. So making sure that you have that margin on top of it. Food and beverage runs at about 30%. Web development can run at about 200%. The reason for that big gap there is that web developers may do 1 or 2 jobs a month because of the time that's involved in it. So they need to run at a higher margin because they haven't got lots of little jobs they're doing. Whereas food and beverage runs at 30% because they're selling lots of cans of beer and lots of steaks on steak night and lots of schnitzels on schnitzel night. And so that 30% over the case of like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dinners and hundreds of purchases adds up to be a good amount of money. Whereas the web developer who can only do 2 jobs a month, they need to charge more because they can only do literally 2 jobs a month. Whilst the value of each job may be higher, they have to put a big margin on top of it in order to cover the fact that all they're making this month is what they're making in those 2 websites. Makes sense, I hope. When you need to be realistic, this is understanding that if you have any sort of thing you do in a market, it's going to be not just what you set, but also what the market's willing to pay for, right? So you're looking at where there's no competitors and high demand, you may be able to raise your margin and have a high margin. Instead of 30%, you might say, I'm going to have a margin of 45% because I'm the only person in town and everybody needs to use me right now. So you might as well, what they say, make hay while the sun shines until a competitor comes along. Very different between raising your margin in order to reflect the fact that you're the only one in town. You don't want to be price gouging though. And I'll talk about more what that is in a sec. Many competitors and low demand means you might need to lower your margins. So that 45% might come down the minute that another person comes into the market who does what you do and they're running at a lower margin. You may have to bring yours down to be a little bit more in line with what they're doing as well. Obviously, some people will come into town and just try and bite market share by just cost cutting, and just undercutting all of your pricing. They won't last long anyway, unless they're backed by a big company. So just beware before you go lowering your costs and lowering your pricing, that you really need to consider that reacting to people coming into the market in a very, very quick, very, very basic way and undercutting you may or may not be something that they can afford to do either. So they may actually be waiting for you to bring that price down themselves. So then they can go, okay, great, I can whack mine back up a little bit more. And also match your price to your target first. Just remember who you're serving. If you're serving people who are living in say a Department of Housing estate, they may not have as much disposable income as someone who's living in the fanciest street in the fanciest part of town. You're going to have to make sure that what you're quoting is appropriate to the target that you're serving. If you're doing premium bathrooms, then you're probably able to have a higher margin because what you're doing is very, very specialized and customized. If you're someone like IKEA who's selling do-it-yourself bathroom kits, then you probably have a lower margin because a lot more people need to be able to afford what you're doing, because if they weren't in a position where they couldn't afford it, they probably have to pay someone else to build the bathroom for them. So you've got to understand who your target audience is, who your customer is, and making sure that you're targeting your pricing accordingly to what it is that they are. So if you're making sure you're just not overcharging people. And that brings us to honesty in this. If you're not honest, if you're not good with your pricing, you will be found out, because price gouging will only hurt you over time. It may hurt your entire town if you're the only petrol station in town and you're deliberately charging a 150% margin on top of what you're really meant to be. Price gouging creates bad reputations and only gives you a short-term gain before people start going, you know what, I'm just not going to bother going here. I'll go to the next town because it's actually cheaper now for me to do that. And plus, you know what, the guy's being an absolute, I want to use a swear word here, but I'll just say he's being a goose, and he's deliberately price gouging and ripping us off. Then you'll see the backlash, and then that short-term gain very quickly disappears when no one wants to use you anymore. Setting out to rip people off will see you go out of business pronto. It's not going to take long. You start ripping people off and you start price gouging them, they will go elsewhere, or they'll just find an excuse not to use your particular product or service, even if once upon a time they thought they needed it. So it's a few pricing traps that you will want to avoid. And one of them is really obvious, which is the price trap of undercutting. Deliberately undercutting everybody in town is not a great way to have a business that lasts. My previous business before this current one was where I came into town and I undercut every other website provider, not just by 20%, but by 90%. I charged so little for a website that it was completely unsustainable. Thankfully, I came to my senses and started charging a rate which was so much more appropriate for what was going on, but it did hurt my business for that first 3 years. It massively impacted on my ability to get by and actually have a business that worked. So deliberately undercutting everyone in town is not a good long-term prospect, because once you start low, you cannot rise high. It'd be like saying that if McDonald's came in and everything was just, $1 Happy Meal, they'd find it very hard to go back up to it being a $7.95 Happy Meal, because people become accustomed to what they were paying in the first place. When they come back and you've risen your prices by 3-4 times, they will not be very impressed, and they'll let other people know just how unimpressed they are. Loss leaders are really good for Kmart and Woolies, but they're not so good for you. Making a loss with one product in order to gain it somewhere else. So I'll often hear the term as, oh, you'll make it up in the swings and roundabouts, which is a way of just saying that, oh, well, we might lose on this, but we're going to make it up down the track on this thing. Now, if you've got lots of cash flow in your business, you may be able to do that. If you're a micro business who's fighting for every single dollar you make, then a loss leader is not going to be good for you. The only time a loss leaders really makes sense is if it's something like a free download that's delivered through a sales funnel or a landing page online that you put in, so share with people on Facebook or through a Facebook ad. Your loss leaders, I'm talking about things like, for instance, if you pay $1 a kilo for strawberries, I can tell you now that the supermarket did not pay $1 a kilo for those strawberries. They paid a little bit more than that, but they're willing to take a bit of a hit for that to get people in the door who will then buy full-priced steak, full-priced bread, full-priced washing powder, full-priced floor cleaner, all because they walked in the door and got the $1 a kilo strawberries. This is what a loss leader basically is saying, I'm willing to lose a bit of money over here in order to make more money over here. You have to have big volumes, and you have to have really good cash flow in place to be able to survive that kind of thing. So the idea is, as a small micro business, every single thing you do needs to turn some kind of profit, or at the very least, pay for itself. Discounting is not a great way to go either, because bargain shoppers are not loyal. You imagine back when there was things like Groupon, Scoopon, Living Social, those coupons you get, and you can go and try out a dinner at a place, and you'd be able to go, oh, you get dinner at 25% of the cost it normally be. So instead of paying $100 for a dinner for two, you get it for $25 for a dinner for two. It was crazy discounting. And the thought was that people come into your restaurant, see how good your food is at a discount, and come back and pay for it full price a couple of times later. It didn't happen, because bargain shoppers will always go for the bargain. People who work with coupons, people who work with discounts, people who shop the specials in the catalogs at Coles and Woolies, we are not particularly loyal to one supermarket over the other. I can tell you now that whoever's got Streets Magnums on special this week is the one that's going to get my shopping, right? I'm not loyal at all between the supermarkets. If IGA has got the Magnums at the cheaper price, I will be doing my basket of shopping with them. It all comes down to bargain shoppers not being loyal. Price-based shoppers are not going to be loyal to you. They will get from you this time, and they'll go to the other provider next time if they get a cheaper deal. They will not grow your business in the long term. So offering constant discounting is not going to help your business in one way at all. So now we get the fun bit. So we've looked at what quoting is and how you do it and all that sort of thing. What we really came onto this to do was to see in action what some of these systems will do. So systems such as ServiceMate, which is a system made mainly for tradies, but it can be used in other applications as well. Quite good for setting yourself up and managing your customer flow. It's like a customer relationship management system that manages jobs being done, as well as the quoting process too. Invented in Darwin, of all places, and still based in Darwin. So I know it quite well, and a lot of tradies here in Darwin do actually work with that, but it's now gone all over Australia and is now starting to go into many places around the world too. Quotient is something that I found a little bit off just by doing a Google search once. I came up with it, looked at how it worked. It templated the quoting process, and I thought it worked really well. It also integrates nicely with Xero, so it can actually export its data into Xero to create an invoice based upon your quote, which was very nice. Really nice system, really beautiful invoices that it produces, and it can be accepted online as well. Xero has its own built-in quoting process, and you find that others like Reckon, QuickBooks, and I'm thinking of the other one, MyOb, they all have these as well. So you'll have lots of systems that have built in to their account systems. They'll have a quoting mechanism in there as well as the invoicing. Xero has its one that then ties into, if it's accepted, goes and creates an invoice, and it's like a bit like a workflow that goes in there. And also Xero has their own workflow management system, much like ServiceMate, called Workflow Max, that also integrates nicely together and helps you to take it from quoting to invoicing to the flow of the work actually being delivered, all in the one sort of ecosystem. That said, ServiceMate also plugs into Xero too, so it doesn't really make a much difference whether you use ServiceMate or something that's internal to Xero like Workflow Max. And finally, the one that I actually use the most now, it's called Quoters. The reason I use Quoters is because it produces a website for the customer. It actually produces an interactive thing they can scroll around, read, it's attractive, it looks good, and then they're able to accept it all online. And because I don't need to put anything into workflows just yet, and I'm producing things that are largely produced just as a one-off piece of work that doesn't require a workflow to produce, then that one's working really well for me. So I'm going to pop in out of this, and we're going to start looking at some of what these systems look like. So first of all, this is the inside of what the system called ServiceMate is. So ServiceMate is all about dispatching jobs, looking at the job history of particular customers, having a client record, creating invoices, and reporting upon your workflow, reporting upon your profitability, all that sort of thing. It's really, really good for tradies because it's an all-in-one system. It's on a desktop or on a laptop, or you can get it on an iPhone app as well. They don't have any plans to do an Android app. So if you're an Android person like me, you'll be doing all your Service Mate on your computer. You won't be doing any of it on your Android tablet or your Android phone. On iPhone, it does work. That said, that you probably will find that you'll work more on your desktop, on your laptop computer, than what you will on a iDevice, simply because there's so much more you can do on here, and it's set out very beautifully, so it's easy for you to use. So if I want to do something in the way of quoting, I look at, say, a dispatch board, and that will take me to what's currently in process. So if there's new jobs, new clients, all that kind of thing, what am I going to do? So if I want to go and create a new job, let's create it over here. I can put the customer in there. So let's just say John Citizen, who is something I created a little bit earlier. I can then say, here's what we're going to do. We're going to go John Citizen. This is who the person who I'm going to be doing this job for is. Then I can go to my quotes and invoicing, add in what the billing address is and say it's the same as the job address, populates it all in there, and say what the work is that's going to be completed. And then I can add all the different line items to it. So the work completed will be, let's just say it's going to be I'm going to say a website. I'm going to build them a website. So I'm building a website on WordPress. So after I've done that, I'm going to then add different products to that. So the product will be WordPress website on its own. So let's just say that that's going to be the website. It's going to be the item name. Oh, sorry, that's a code. Let's just say the code's going to be web 1. No, not labor, web. So I've got a whole bunch of them in here that have come in from my other systems. So we're going to say a website comprehensive package, 3-page WordPress website. Let's just say the website comprehensive package. Now this is because I've connected this through to Xero, so it knows what my pricing is straight away. It's pulling it all in. So in this particular case, and these are all dummy data, it's not my real data, so don't quote me on these prices. As that's the comprehensive package I'm doing. Plus I'm going to add another thing. I'm going to add something social media. So I'm looking at social, nothing in there. How about Facebook? Nothing in there. So I can add a new thing or search for what's already in there. So I can say that, okay, I'm going to do an ASBAS one-to-one session for this person at that particular cost. Again, dummy data. Please don't think that's how much ASBAS costs. It doesn't. And then adds all this up. So my quote is starting to produce something that's coming out at $1,500 now. Then I can go another ad. I'm going to add another service in there. I'm going to say that this is a software license for some of the software that I might need for this particular client. And then I've added that on. My quote has now grown up to $1,693. Then I can produce the quote. So it's now produced that quote and it's now saved it. And here's what it looks like. So I've got my quote all set out with my branding over it. And it's got a validity date for 30 days because that's what I've set it to be. And then the customer can either print this out and sign it and give it to me, or they can operate from, printing it out, emailing it, signing it, and then re-scanning it in, something like that. But in this case, the quote doesn't produce something which is going to be click here to accept. It's not quite that well integrated. This is designed really mainly for tradies who are not going to be on their email all the time. So getting notifications back from email is probably not the way they're going to get it all because they're usually out on the job site at the time. So they're not connected to their email all day long. So you can see it produces something really nice. You can print it, you can email it, you can even SMS a link to this particular quote via SMS. And there is a certain inclusion at the, I think it's $29 a month level, where you get a certain amount of SMSs for free that are included in that price. Or even at the free level, you do get a certain amount of SMS that you're allowed to have, but they do give you a free trial of 14 days to try out this particular system. Again, really, really geared towards tradies, but to give you an idea, I'm actually looking to come across to it for some of the things I do to help me to manage the incoming workload and to be able to then put it into a client history as well. It's one of the examples this does. It's also a client management system. I can go into my clients list and I can actually see what the clients have done. I can go Channel 10 Darwin or 5P Consulting. I can go in and open that client's record so I can see what it is we did when we did it. All this data has just come in from my from my Zoom account. So it's got things that I've paid, not just things that people that pay me. So things like, I pay 7-Eleven, 7-Eleven doesn't pay me. AAMI insurance, I pay them, they don't pay me. It just brings it all across in one. This happens when you add your Xero connection through, and they've got an incentive for you. If you're going to get that 14-day free trial, if you connect your Xero account, they figure that's going to make it more usable in your trial. And so they'll add an extra 7 days on top. So then you've got 21 days in which to use and test out the system to see if it's for you. I've been sort of having a play with it. I'm really, really liking the look of it. I might actually end up using it as a way to help manage my clients and the workflow through them. So always have those client records running. So at the pricing, you've got different plans. If I choose a plan, you can see how much this costs. And this is in Australian dollars. $9 a month for the light version, includes 30 included SMSs to send those quotes through to. 15 jobs a month. So if you're not doing any more than that, you'll be probably safe within here. So that's a really good starting point. Then $29 Australian a month if you want to go to a bit more of a complete package in there that includes things like recurring jobs and reminders. And you can check all this out anyway at servicemate.com. So servicem8.com, and you'll have all the information in there. So that's looking at ServiceMate. The next system we'll look at is called Quotient, and Quotient is it's just, I think, a beautiful system. And so one I was using up until probably about 6 months ago because it just works so damn well for me. So I'm going to sign into it, and in here I'll see a record of all my previous ones, right? So I'm going to say, look at this one for Clove Tree Hill. So I can look at my previous quotes and go, these are all the pieces of it. There's notes that have been left along there. So Eileen's left me a lovely note there to make sure that everything's covered off, and it has a record of that. So if the client is coming back and saying things, you can leave that, or you can comment back, and that notifies the client that you've added something to that quote process. So it becomes a little bit of a messaging platform. Or you can leave yourself a private note that doesn't go to the client, isn't visible by the client. It's just visible by you and your team. So if you want to use that to say, okay, on this quote, please bear in mind when you read this, my team members, that this is what you're delivering, even though it says this in the quote. So we look at all that. We say, okay, that looks really nice. Everything's added up nicely. They get to then download their PDF as well, which allows them to, so if I download that PDF now and show you what it looks like, it looks like this. So I haven't got my branding on there. I took the branding off, but that normally would have a logo at the top as well as all your contact details, the amount of quotes you've run, and then the details in there, as well as then a record of the conversation that you've had with your client backwards and forwards. Again, it's not going to show you the private messages on there that you've left for yourself, only the ones that have been visible to the actual client themselves. So in there, you can then go and archive that because it's now being done, or you can do things like withdrawing the quote. You can force an exception on that quote, so acceptance on that quote. So if someone said over the phone, yeah, I've accepted that, or email just said, yeah, mate, I'm going to accept that quote, you can run that as an accepted thing, and it may be then connected through to your Xero account or to your MyOb account or to some other accounts that help you to generate invoices. It'll go in as a job to be creating an invoice, then you approve that invoice and send it out in your accounting systems. So it does give you then the ability to do that. One of the things I like really heavily about this, I create a new quote, and it's giving me a bunch of templates that I've pre-set up. So for search engine optimization, which is one of the things I will do, it's got all the items already built in that I can add. So it's got the fact that there's no tax on this, and I need to add the tax on the end if that's a particular setup. If I've got little items down here that are price lines, then it's already in there. This is a bad example because this doesn't actually have any left in there. But if I go to something more like website or WordPress website, then I've got the pricing already in there for that particular item. And then there'll be others if those are still valid parts. As I said, I don't use this particular one anymore because I've moved on to another system, but you would see what the availability of this could be for you. Say, for instance, there's an example of social media marketing for a full funnel Facebook, Instagram advertising campaign, minimally for 3 months. All the details are included, well, the price and the total. And all it needs to do is add on some GST at the end, where I can then also add in certain terms and conditions. So I can say something like what you need to know. So here you go, what you need to know about your Google Analytics, for instance, and it's already in there, the terms and conditions you want to add on to it. So you're not having to rewrite a quote from scratch every single time. Now, if you've got maybe one of these happening a month, that may not be a problem for you. But if you're finding you're doing 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 quotes a week, as I often find myself doing, don't win them all, but I have to quote them to be in the running, then you'll find that systems like this that automate a lot of that, and they remember your pricing, they remember your client details, they remember your formatting, they're going to become your best friend really quickly. So we'll pop out of that one now. So we're starting to run out of time. And what we're going to do is pop into another one, which is Xero. So I'm in Xero here. And this is a particular invoice that I created, but I'm going to go now and create a quote. So if you're in Xero, you'll look a bit like this. I'm going to go in and create a quote based upon certain things that are in my Xero system. So once I'm in there, it's taking a little bit of a while. A little slow today. I can see some of the quotes that I've done in the past, and I can go in and say, for instance, go for this one for Brit, and for some work that I did her. She won't be showing. You can take that quote and go, I want to do exactly the same thing for another company. You can then copy this as a template. So you can go, okay, this is the one I'm actually going to do. I'm going to turn this into a quote, create a draft, and then you then attach that to a different client. So instead of Brit, I can say this one is for Jack. And then it could be that one. So that becomes the client that this is going to go to. So I'll then get a new quote number. The dating is now set different. I can make it expire in 30 days, just like we were talking about earlier, and then produce this. Now, what the quote actually looks like is going to be how you set it in your pre-settings. So you'll have settings within Xero that will allow you to do that. Now, why would I use something else instead of this? Because this seems like it all works together. I can turn a quote into an invoice. It's all there. It's all in one thing. Why would I not use this system and just make it easy for myself? The reason is because just about everybody out there in my world is going to get this kind of quote straight out of Xero. Everyone's going to be doing exactly the same thing. Every quote's going to look exactly the same. I want to stand out. And that's why I've now decided to use a system called Quoters. So Quoters is something a little bit more that allows you to create something that's not as integrated with things like Xero, but allows you to create something quite beautiful. So now I'm going to Quoters. If I go and log into that, and if we then open up, I think my housemate might be playing a game at the moment because the internet connection has slowed massively. Let's log in. There we go. And now we start to see some of the work I've done more recently. So for instance, if I was looking for any of those particular quotes, I can then duplicate any of those. I can clone it. So if I wanted to do this exact thing, I knew it was in there, I can clone that for another client. If I can go into this and go, this is exactly the same thing I want to do, I'm going to clone it for another client and then adding their details. But let's just say I want to create a new proposal. What I actually might do is actually show you what the end result of a proposal of these looks like. So one would be this one, which is a sponsored thing I'm doing for someone. If I'm going to preview it, it actually creates and inserts. So I've connected my domain name to this as well. So you'll see at the top here is proposals.dantestjames.com, and then it shows the particular proposal we're looking at. So in this, I've got a website that's essentially been created with all the details of this proposal for this particular not-for-profit that I'm sponsoring. So you'll see that I've done something which is very much in tune with what they do. I've put a background in there that looks good. I've made sure that the fonts and all that sort of work, and that it's got this subdued but very easy to read, very clear about what I'm doing in the proposal, what I'm going to provide, very clear about what I'm going to do in terms of the value of it. So even though this is a zero amount thing, because it's going to be completely sponsored for them, this is very clear to them what they're getting and what it's actually worth. Because when this particular charity has to report back to the value of the people who have donated, they have to then be able to put all these things down to ensure they're doing the right thing and they're being good stewards of the donations that people are giving them. So to be able to break that down, they can say, this is what we got for a sponsorship that was of this particular amount. So it might not be cash in the bank, but they still need to account for it. And then things like what I expect as a part of what I'm delivering to them, tickets to their gala events. I'll expect that I get mentioned as a sponsor on their print media and merchandise and their other media, whatever they're running. And then also things like their next steps. So they go down, this is just a website they can view anywhere on a mobile phone. It looks really good as well. In fact, let's have a look at it on Google Chrome. There you go. So it looks good on a phone too. So it's always going to look good no matter what they're viewing that on. So it's a really good system for that. It's going to look attractive. And the reason I do this is I want to stand out and look different. They can still download a PDF if they need to send that off to their accountant. It has an accept button up there, which they can click. That's already been accepted, so it's already gone out. But that would actually say, accept this quote up the top on a button. And I'll probably show you an example of one that hasn't been accepted that I can probably show you would be this one for Holikos. So they did actually accept. There's an accept button right there where they can actually accept that particular one. And you see this one's a completely different looking proposal, more corporate, less touchy-feely, definitely more corporate and more about inserting areas like, for instance, why they should choose me for this particular campaign. So you can see it's a very, very beautiful system, very, very easy to do. Let's set up a quote from scratch to create a new proposal. You can choose one of these. I've got a bunch of previous ones I've used. I can use those as templates to begin with, or I can use a template that they've actually provided as part of the system. So if you're doing something like copywriting, as I mentioned before, they've got a layout that's ready for copywriting. So you can call this copywriting for Dan's fishing adventures. And the contact will be, you create the contact of whoever that is, or a new one of the new client, into their details in there. So let's just say Dan, the man, Dan at fishing.com.au. That's all the basics I have to put in there. I don't have to include any more details apart from what's at the top, because naturally they're going to receive this through their email. Save the contact, and then it says, let's go. And you get to create your proposal from scratch here. So I can say it's already selected the template. It's given me the sections that I just type in over the top of what I want to put in there. So in there's pictures. You can add in there. You can make it as gorgeous as you want to. And you can even make these into videos like the one you've got here. So we've got a video there. If you want to add something that's just that little bit more wow factor. So I work in marketing, so the wow factor is very important to me. It may not be quite so important to you. And then of course, then the finances and your branding, whatever everything looks like. So create something that looks about you, introduces you, is putting your best foot forward, has all the things you need, like proposal, terms and conditions, and has everything you need, including the ability to be able to accept at the top of it. So that is a bunch of systems that you can check out for yourself. You will like one over the other in terms of efficiency. If you're already using Xero as your accounting system, that kind of makes sense that you would use the quoting system within Xero. I myself am in a very visual world, so I like to be able to do something differently. Quotas works for me, but Quotient used to be the one I used to love working with. I thought it was fantastic to work with. And then ServiceMate is something which I'm looking at a possibility of taking on as not just a quoting system, but a full service system where people can request my services through a form on my website that populates into ServiceMate. And then I'm able to take that out, work on it, track it, have all the notes about that client, and then do things like creating quotes along the way as well, and have that tracked all in one system. So what you choose will be completely up to you, but there's 4 systems that could work for you and do some great things for your particular business.